The wind howled across the barren plains as the sun sank low, painting the sky in streaks of blood red and gold, and Jacob Miles, a solitary rancher with calloused hands and a heart worn down by years of loss, was mending a broken fence post when he heard a faint, trembling voice carried on the wind, a voice so fragile it almost didn't sound human at first. He froze, his hammer mid-swing, straining his ears until he heard it again, clearer this time, a desperate, quivering plea. "Please, help me." The words pierced through the stillness like a knife, making his heart thump against his ribs. Dropping his tools, Jacob scanned the horizon until he spotted movement, a figure stumbling along the dirt trail, her form barely upright, swaying like she could collapse at any moment. As he approached, he saw the truth that made his blood run cold. She was a young woman, her face battered and bruised, one eye swollen shut, dried blood crusting at the corner of her lips, her clothes torn and caked with dust. She was clutching her side as though each breath tore through her ribs, her boots half shredded from walking barefoot miles before finding them again. Jacob rushed forward, catching her just as her knees gave way, his hands firm yet gentle as he lowered her to the ground. "Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice low but trembling with restrained fury. Her lips trembled, and she shook her head, as if even saying their names would summon them. "Devil's kin," she whispered, the name dripping with terror, and Jacob felt a deep chill run down his spine. Everyone in these parts knew that name. The Devil's kin were not just outlaws. They were a merciless clan of sadistic killers who thrived on fear, riding into towns like a plague, leaving behind nothing but ashes and bodies. Jacob's mind flashed with memories he'd long buried, of the night the same clan had taken his brother's life years ago, branding their symbol into the barn wall as a warning. He thought he'd left that pain behind, retreating to this quiet stretch of land, but now, holding this broken girl in his arms, he knew there would be no more hiding. "You're safe now," he said, more to himself than to her, carrying her into his cabin where the smell of wood smoke and coffee filled the air. He laid her on his bed, fetched clean water, and began carefully cleaning her wounds, his hands steady despite the storm brewing inside him. Every flinch, every soft whimper from her lips was like a spark to dry tinder in his chest, igniting an anger he had sworn never to unleash again. Between sips of water, she began to speak in broken sentences how the Devil's kin had stormed the small settlement she lived in, how they had dragged her father away and beaten her when she tried to stop them, how she had fled into the night with no direction but away. Jacob listened in silence, his jaw clenched so tight it ached, because he knew the Devil's kin didn't leave loose ends. If they had seen her run, they would come for her, and if they came for her, they'd come to his land. Outside, the sky darkened into a deep bruised purple, and a coyote's cry echoed from the hills. But Jacob's focus was locked on the firelight dancing across the girl's bruised face. She didn't need to tell him what they'd do if they caught her. He already knew. He also knew that men like the Devil's kin understood only one language force. Jacob stood, his boots creaking against the wooden floorboards, and walked to the corner where his rifle leaned against the wall. His fingers brushed over the cold steel, feeling the weight of a choice he had avoided for years. He'd left the world of violence behind, traded it for solitude, but fate had dragged it back to his doorstep. He turned back to the girl who now lay asleep, her breathing shallow but steadier, her face softened in the flicker of the lamp. Jacob made a silent promise then, not just to protect her, but to make sure the Devil's kin never hurt anyone again. He moved quietly around the cabin, locking doors, loading cartridges, and setting extra logs on the fire. Somewhere out there, in the darkness, the Devil's kin might already be on their way. But Jacob Miles wasn't the same man they thought they'd find. This time, he would be waiting. And when they came, they'd learn that even a lonely rancher can become something dangerous when he's got nothing left to lose and someone left to save. Asterisk. The night settled heavy over the plains. The kind of silence that makes the hair on your arms rise because you know it's only the calm before a storm. And Jacob Miles sat at the table with his rifle laid out before him, oiling the barrel with slow, deliberate motions as the firelight flickered shadows across the cabin walls. his ears tuned to every whisper of wind outside. The girl, her name was Claire, he'd learned slept fitfully in his bed, her brow furrowed even in dreams, and Jacob felt a strange protectiveness growing in him. Like she was family, like she'd always been meant to be here. But his gut told him the devil's kin wouldn't wait until morning. Sure enough, sometime past midnight, the distant, rhythmic thunder of hooves reached his ears, faint at first but growing steadily, until the sound rolled over the land like an approaching storm. Jacob's hand closed around the rifle, and he moved to the window, pushing the curtain back just enough to see the silhouettes cresting the Ridge 6 riders, their horses black against the moonlit horizon, each man carrying the swagger of someone who'd never been stopped, torches burning in their hands. They didn't ride fast. They didn't need to. This was a clan that hunted slow, savoring the fear they spread. Jacob's jaw clenched as memories flashed his brother's body in the dirt, the laughing voices fading into the night, and his heart hardened into something unyielding. He moved quickly but quietly, positioning himself behind the overturned table he'd dragged to the center of the room, checking the chamber of his rifle, then grabbing the revolver from his hip and setting it within easy reach. The pounding of hooves drew closer until the ground beneath the cabin trembled, and then came the sound of boots hitting the dirt, voices calling out, low and mocking. "We know she's in there, rancher," one voice drawled from the darkness, a voice dripping with amusement. "Hand her over, and maybe we'll let you keep your skin." Jacob said nothing, only listening, waiting. Another voice, harsher, spat into the dirt. "Ain't no one says no to the devil's kin, not without ending up in the ground." Jacob's eyes flicked toward Claire's sleeping form. She stirred, murmuring his name in her sleep, and something inside him snapped, like a rope pulled too tight. Without warning, the first torch flew through the cabin's front window, smashing into the far wall and scattering burning oil across the floor. Jacob moved fast, stamping it out with a wet rag, and before the men outside could react, he fired. The first shot, the crack split the night wide open, and one of the silhouettes dropped instantly from his saddle. Chaos erupted, men shouting, horses rearing, the smell of gunpowder filling the air. Jacob's hands worked with deadly precision, chambering round after round, each shot aimed with the cold patience of someone who'd been here before. They tried to rush the porch, but he'd nailed planks across the steps earlier, forcing them into the open where his bullets found them one by one. But the devil's kin were relentless. Two of them broke toward the barn, likely hoping to flank him. Jacob grabbed his revolver and ducked out the back door, the cold night air biting his skin as he moved along the wall of the cabin, his boots silent in the dirt. He caught the first man rounding the corner and put him down with a single shot. The second lunged at him with a knife, but Jacob caught his wrist, slammed him against the wall, and drove the barrel of his revolver into his gut before pulling the trigger. The man crumpled without a sound. Jacob's lungs burned, his muscles screaming, but he knew it wasn't over. Three still remained, their shadows dancing in the firelight from the fallen torch outside. He stepped into the open, his voice carrying over the chaos. "You picked the wrong ranch, boys." There was no hesitation now. He moved with grim purpose, each shot he took ringing with years of buried rage, until the last of the devil's kin lay still in the dust. The only sounds the crackle of dying flames and the ragged draw of his own breath. Jacob stood there a long moment, staring at the bodies under the moonlight, before finally lowering his rifle. Inside, Claire was awake, now sitting up in bed, her eyes wide with fear until she saw him standing in the doorway, unhurt. She didn't speak, just covered her face and began to sob, not out of fear, but relief. Jacob crossed the room and crouched beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "It's over," he said softly, and for the first time in years, he felt the weight on his chest ease. Outside, the dawn began to break, streaking the sky with light, washing away the darkness. But Jacob knew evil wasn't gone from the world, only from his land. He had taken a stand, and in doing so, found something worth living for again. And as he looked into Claire's tearful eyes, he knew that sometimes one man's choice to fight back could change the course of another's life forever. Friends, if stories like this move you, if you believe in standing up for what's right no matter the odds, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because here, we tell the kind of stories that remind you courage still has a place in this world, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Asterisk. The sun rose over the plains in a wash of gold and soft pink, but for Jacob Miles, the night's battle still clung to the air like smoke, the smell of gunpowder and blood lingering even as the wind tried to carry it away. The bodies of the devil's kin lay where they had fallen, their shadows stretching long across the dirt as the morning light touched them. Jacob stood on the porch, sipping bitter coffee from a dented tin mug, his eyes scanning the horizon not out of fear, but out of habit, because a man who has fought the kind of fight he had last night knows that trouble often travels with a long shadow. Inside, Claire moved quietly about the cabin, her steps light but no longer dragging with exhaustion. She had found an oversized flannel shirt of Jacob's to wear, and the color had started to return to her cheeks. The night had changed her as much as it had changed him. She no longer looked like someone simply running away. She looked like someone who had survived. After breakfast, Jacob saddled his old bay mare and rode to the nearest town, towing a makeshift cart with the bodies of the devil's kin, their branded jackets a warning to anyone who thought Jacob's ranch was easy prey. The sheriff, a man with more whiskey in his belly than courage in his bones, met Jacob on the main street, his eyes widening at the sight. "Miles, what the hell did you do?" he stammered. Jacob fixed him with a steady stare. "I finished what you wouldn't start," he said, and left the cart right there in the dust, turning his horse back toward home. Word spread faster than wildfire in dry grass by noon. Everyone within 50 miles knew what had happened, and though some muttered that Jacob had painted a target on his own back, others spoke of him with a respect that had been missing for years. Back at the ranch, Jacob began repairing the front window, each hammer strike steady, deliberate, as if sealing away the violence of the night before. But he knew the truth: evil doesn't vanish, it just retreats to lick its wounds. The devil's kin had other members scattered across the territories, and there would come a time when some cousin, some brother, some bloodthirsty fool would come riding for revenge. Jacob didn't fear it. He had faced them once and sent them into the dirt. He would do it again if the land demanded it. Claire, for her part, began to find her own footing, helping feed the horses, patching worn saddle blankets, even laughing now and then when the ranch dog, Boone, tried to steal biscuits from the table. And sometimes Jacob caught her staring out at the hills, her eyes soft but far away, like she was imagining a life not chained by fear. One evening, as the sun sank low, Claire came to where Jacob was sitting on the porch and said quietly, "I don't know if I can ever repay you." Jacob shook his head. "You don't owe me a thing. Just live, that's payment enough." The two sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the wind in the grass and the faint clink of Boone's collar as he lay at their feet. But Jacob knew deep down that fate had tied their paths together for a reason. Maybe he'd saved her life, but in some way, she had saved his too, pulled him out of the grave he'd been digging for himself since the night his brother died. And as the first stars began to prick through the darkening sky, Jacob felt a quiet peace settle over the ranch, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. Friends, if you believe in standing up against darkness, in fighting for those who can't fight for themselves, make sure you subscribe to this channel, because here we tell the stories that prove courage is still alive in this world, and the next tale might just be the one that changes the way you see everything.